we've seen the culmination of God's plan as Jesus went to the cross. All of God's planning for us as his children to be saved, to be free from death, was what took place on that cross and thereafterwards. Because the resurrection wouldn't mean much to us unless Jesus was alive in bodily form on the earth. And that's what he's proven in these 40 days. He's going to have enough witnesses that the story can be told from beginning to end, and Jesus rising from the death of the cross and went to heaven. And that's a complete story. That's what we read in the Bible. The Bible is a lot of stories put together. Of course, they're inspired stories. They're true stories, but they're still stories that God thought we could read and learn some things from. So here in this 40 days, we can learn more about Jesus, because remember, last week we talked about the fact that everything is amiss right now. The disciples have fled. Jesus is dead. Of course, remember, in the Jewish culture, the way they showed that you were dead or proved you were dead, you had to be in the grave 3 days. So that would prove that Jesus was dead. Now, when we pick up the story, we're going to see Mary Magdalene at the grave. I don't know if she had gone to the grave first to do the things they do to a dead body. They put spices in with it, and they wrap the body, and they put the covering over their face. So Mary may have been there to do that. Mary Magdalene may have been there to do that. We don't know. But we know that will happen, which shows us that the disciples were all together with these ladies, these women. So obviously they all did not think that Christ was raised from the dead, did they? They don't have that anticipation. They don't have that hope. They're getting together and they're having a pity party. Woe is us, because Christ is gone. So everything is in disarray. Jesus has 40 days to get all of his plans together for the church. And the main part of that plan, a big part of that plan, is for the disciples, for the apostles, the 12 apostles, to go out into the world and teach others, to teach others, to teach others, to teach others. That's God's plan, and it's going to happen. But the disciples and the followers of Jesus don't understand that. He's dead, right? So we need to go take care of him, put the spices on him, and set him up for lifetime burial, right? What happens when Mary gets there? Or Mary Magdalene? And by the way, there's probably more than her just there. It doesn't really, not all that clear, but let's see. The other reference on that is John 28, 9 to 10. And we can be in John 20 is also a reference to this. When Mary Magdalene found out Jesus was not in the tomb, where does she head to? Do what? Yeah, she wants to go tell the apostles, the other people, other women who were in the room. Can't, wait to tell. Is she going to tell them that Jesus is alive? No, the body's missing according to her. That's a big deal. Somebody stole the body. So she goes running back to tell them that. So she's the first one to know that Jesus is not in the tomb. And then the other women returning went to the tomb. And then that was the second appearance of Jesus to someone. And then he appears to Peter. Luke 24 and verse 34. Starting at verse 33. And they arose that very hour and returned to Jerusalem and found gathered together the 11 and those who were with them, saying, the Lord has really risen and has appeared to Simon. Now, we're not getting the whole story here. I used to try to put all this together with the four Gospels. You can't do it, because some of the writers are covering parts of things, and other writers are covering other parts of things. So it's not in conflict with each other, but it's not synonymous either. You can't put it together like a puzzle. Things are going to be said in some of the gospel, or one of the gospels is not said in another part of the gospel. But here we know the gospel, the rock is open, the grave is open. They know Jesus is not there, but they don't know what's happened. So meanwhile, back at the tomb, something strange happens. These women see something. What do they see? Yeah, they see angels, 2 angels. What if you were sleeping the night and 2 angels woke you up and wanted to talk with you? That'd probably be scary for us. So anyway, 2 angels, and he explains to them that Christ is gone. Christ is not anywhere around right now. He rose, and like he said he would. And he instructs the women to do what? What does he tell them to do? Rather than doing a text message, she's got to go and tell the disciples what she had seen and heard. They didn't know they were angels. I don't really know. They didn't tell us. Said what? Yeah. At first, he thought they were the gardeners. Yeah. But once they talked to her, I don't know if she then understood whether they were angels or not. I would think so, because they're giving her the heavenly message here. So anyway, they go back and tell, and there's a race. We have a foot race. And who's going to win it? Who wins the foot race? John does. He's the youngest. Peter's a little older, so John's a little faster. So they race to the tomb. John gets there first, but he won't go in. He's too timid to go in. Is Peter too timid to go in? No. He runs right on in, just like a bull in a china shop. What does Peter and John do after they see that Christ is not there? So, yeah. Do they know that Christ is alive at this point? Doesn't seem that that's the way, but they'll be told that, and they won't believe it. And even when they see Jesus, do they recognize him? No. And if you think somebody's dead, you know somebody's dead, you saw him die, and then you're looking at him, you'd shake your head, wouldn't you? It can't be. So, boy, that person looks an awful lot like somebody else I know, right? But John, again, doesn't go in the tomb. Peter charges right on in. Peter's scratching his head. By this point, John believes that Jesus is risen. Now, I don't know how much effect he had on the other disciples. I'm sure he told them that he believed that Jesus was risen. But anyway, both of them leave for home. Mary Magdalene again stays at the tomb. If you go back, it's interesting, this is in John 28, but if you go back to John 20, it's talking about Mary Magdalene just right there at the tomb, leaning up against the rock probably and crying. And then we jump all the way over to John 28 where everybody gets involved in the picture. But anyway, when you see two angels, and you don't know what angels look like anyway. I don't know what angels look like. You see two angels, what is going to be your thoughts? Exactly. I don't think you're going to have one. You're going to gasp, and your mind's going to go whirling, but you won't know what to say, and you probably won't say anything. So anyway, they see the two angels. She obviously was taking some wrappings to wrap Jesus with. What did the two angels talk to her about? What is she doing? She's crying. So he says, "Why are you crying?" And she says, "Well, they've taken away my Lord." She thought somebody had robbed the body. And what happens next? Do what? Yeah. Does she recognize Jesus? Yeah, she didn't know who he was. And I try to put myself in her place. If I saw somebody, I'm sure somebody's dead, and I see that person alive again, I would think, wow, does that person look like so-and-so? I would never think, well, that person's risen from the dead. I would have less expectation for that now than maybe Mary would have at that time, but she certainly did not recognize Jesus, but he was just standing a few feet from her. And he says the same thing the angel said, "Woman, why weepest thou? Whom do you seek?" And she, supposing him to be the gardener, said to him, "Sir, if thou have borne him hence, tell me where you laid him, and I will take him away." So she's still thinking, somebody stole the body, and probably this gardener right here. And so, anyway, Jesus says unto her at that time, "Mary," and then she recognizes Jesus. These women were very, very loyal. If you read all the way through there, a lot of times it won't mention all the women. It'll mention Mary, it'll mention Mary Magdalene, it'll mention Martha maybe, but it'll say, "and the women." Like right now, up in the room, there are the apostles and the women. Now, I don't know how many women they're usually talking about, but there are obviously a very loyal group of women following Jesus. They've heard him teach, and obviously they call him master when they address him. So he is somebody that they think is telling the truth and is the Son of God. We would be the same way. Think about this. If we could see the Son of God, if we could see Jesus right now, would we want to gather around him and ask questions and talk to him? I mean, the hunger for that would be just, we couldn't stand it. We'd be like some of these people that go to these rock and roll shows and they lose all sense. We would be excited. We would want to be near him. We'd want to ask him questions. Well, these people are the same way. And they're going to get all excited because now they've heard that Jesus is alive. So they're going to prove it. Of course, John and Peter running, and they don't see Jesus, so they can't prove it. But when Jesus says something to Peter, he then knows that that's Christ. Now, remember that the Jews used part of days as whole days. So we had the crucifixion When? Friday. In the grave, Saturday. Arose, Sunday. I was watching a religious thing on TV the other day, and the guy was explaining what life was like in the time of Jesus. And he said, well, Jesus was crucified on Wednesday, spent 3 24-hour days in the grave, and rose on Sunday. So you can see where that goes. It's still Sunday. Peter leaves the other disciples, and Christ appears to him by himself. And that's amazing. What do you think Peter felt like? Now, this will be the first time he has seen Jesus since he denied him. What do you think he was thinking when he saw Jesus? Yeah, this is Peter. If I was in his shoes, I would be really afraid to see anybody, really, because of the stand that he's taken. He denied Christ. He didn't want to see Christ. He knows that he messed up. But in Luke 24:34, let me read the verse before that. I read that a while ago. And they rose in that very hour and returned to Jerusalem and found gathered together the 11 and those who were with them, saying, the Lord has really risen and has appeared to Simon. So they all began to talk about what experiences they had. The women would have seen him before the men, and then Peter saw him by himself. So they are coming to the conclusion Jesus has arisen. And they came to that conclusion much quicker than I would think I would. You think about somebody dying, you know they're dead and arising again, even though Jesus had been preaching that for 3 years. And yet the disciples had not gotten it. So here's what he had to do to get the disciples on board. They're now on board. They believe that Jesus arose again. This talk on the road to Emmaus has always befuddled me. I'd like to know who those guys were. Some people say that was probably Peter and John. I don't see the evidence for that. But as you look in Luke 24:13, and that whole passage going down to verse 31, long reading, but that's where he's talking to the two on the road to Emmaus. I got a feeling it was two of the apostles. I don't know which two, but if y'all know, let me know. Yes. Yes. Do we know who Cleopas is? No. I want to call it another word for Peter. That's what everybody always, another word for Peter. But we don't have a clue who Cleopas is. This is the only time he's found. And we don't really know anything about him. Thank you, Andy, for bringing that up. Okay, what verse? 15? 16? Okay. So it's somebody who knows Jesus, right? Or they would have recognized him immediately. Mm-hmm. What do they talk about? Yeah. what do they basically tell Jesus? Man, this thing was going good. We had the Messiah here. We had high hopes that we were going to have our independence from Rome, and we thought the Jews were going to rule the world. And here they find out they're not. That's not what's going to happen. And what he's telling him here on the road to Emmaus is we had all these high hopes, and then Jesus died. They killed him. So now we're back at square one and maybe minus one. But that's not the case. It's interesting how down all these people were after having been taught for 3 years about the resurrection. Yes, sir. Yeah. It didn't realize it. Yeah, it really is amazing as you read the story about Jesus 40 days after his resurrection. It's hard to believe, and it would be hard for us to believe. Andy?
I think it's just two regular disciples, not the apostles. The reason I say that is they go and they find the 11. The 11 are the apostles.
True.
They didn't say they found the 9.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. And we really don't know how many followers he had that were faithful at this time, still following him. Don't you imagine of the thousands that were following him when he entered Jerusalem that they have scattered? We don't know that guy. He was killed by Rome, and if you know him, you're in danger. Al?
I'm always amazed at the wisdom, I guess, of the Spirit. If they had instantly recognized him, people wouldn't believe. But this gave him a chance to go back to all the prophecies, tell the story that only somebody with that kind of knowledge would know, and the Jews would know. So it gives more evidence to who it was, I think. They just said, yep, we saw Jesus.
No, you didn't.
Somebody that looked like Jesus.
Yeah, no, you didn't. Yeah.
This gives it more opportunity for testimony.
Yeah. That's a good point. I'll come back to that. Lee? Right. You didn't know that, did you? You didn't know we had 13 apostles there at the end? Yeah. Any others? Yes. You think they're on overload? All right, good point. I'm not going to comment on that. You're going to get me in trouble. All right. Okay, who does he next see? He saw the disciples on the road to Emmaus. That's where we left off. Who does he next see? The apostles. Thank you. Yeah. Mark 16, he sees the apostles. Now, putting this together it takes a little judgment. So I don't argue about anybody's linkage on this, but I think this is pretty accurate. Let me read Mark 16 for you. Naturally. I'll read this. And afterward he appeaappeared to the 11 themselves as they were reclining at the table. And he reproached them for their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they had not believed those who had seen him after he had arisen. So we learned something about the apostles. The apostles didn't believe, and Jesus is scolding them for that. I can't believe I spent 3 years teaching you this what was going to happen, and you still don't believe. That was shocking to Jesus. And so he scolded them, and I think probably that would probably have been a pretty good scolding. Andy?
What's interesting to me is that the Jewish leaders set a guard on the tomb because they remembered that Jesus had predicted that he would rise again. The disciples forgot.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Thank you. You're not allowed to bring that one up. See, y'all trying to get me in trouble, I know. Okay. Now, we'll jump into the end. Do they believe that Jesus is in the flesh right now? I don't think so. When Jesus was on the other side of the lake, and they are fishing, they go over there, what is Jesus doing? What's he going to do for them right there? And I think this is a big point that we overlook. He's got a fire going, right? He's going to cook their breakfast. Again, a very good lesson. Here Jesus is. He's the rabbi. He's the shepherd. They're the flock. And yet he's cooking their breakfast. Jesus is showing humility and service all the way through his life. So when the disciples hit the shore, there's Jesus. They're still not believing that. They're still shaking their head a little bit. But when they are able to touch the scars, and we read about, help me out, doubting Thomas, touching the scars. He had to touch the scars and all that. We don't know that the other 11 didn't do that as well, because they were with him that first week. Thomas missed that meeting. And anyway, the other disciples were with him, and they could have felt the scars and had a head start on all that. We don't read where they ever disbelieved, but we don't read that they didn't feel the scars. Evidence, we like, as humans, we like evidence. And so when somebody tells us something that's tough to believe, they better have evidence or they're not going to convince us. Well, now, the disciples have been told Jesus has risen from the dead. They did not believe. And we go through several stories, and they still don't believe. And so finally, we're at the point now they believe. They believe that Jesus is resurrected from that death on the cross. And he also scolds them a little bit, because they're the people who he's depending on to carry the gospel to the world, and they're hiding. Because if you remember, even this last time we said that they saw Jesus, they're still in the upper room. They haven't gone anywhere. They're huddling, they're hiding. And that's a lesson, I think, that we all can learn from. There was good articles this week by Matt and several others about sharing the gospel. And are we hiding in our upper room? Or are we available to take the gospel to the world? That's the question Matt asked in that column this week. And sometimes we don't think about that. We can get pretty good at huddling after a while. And we are. I think we're pretty good at that. So, all right. Now, we're toward the end. And Jesus is, again, having breakfast with his disciples. What does he tell them? What is the last words that Jesus speaks to them? Do what? Right. What's going to happen? We know. Yeah, we know. They don't know. There you go. And this is true in all four Gospels, by the way. So obviously God meant for us to get it. Maybe not the exact words, but all authority has been given to me in heaven and earth. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I command you. And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the age. That is repeated in some form or other in all the Gospels. So is it something that God wants us to hear and see? It is. I think it's pretty important. I was teaching in China, and we're talking about this. One of the young ladies, and it's mostly ladies over there, we have a very hard time converting men. But anyway, they talked about, well, if we go out and we start teaching somebody the gospel, and we get caught teaching them the gospel, we go to jail. So do we have to go out and teach in the open and go to jail for Christ? And I think some of them would. And my opinion of that was no. But you still can have your house churches. House churches got a bad name back when all that around Gainesville happened. But you can have a house church. You can't afford a building, can't have a building. You can meet in somebody's house. And that's what they do over there. Because it's against the law for them to meet. They don't allow the church to meet as a group. And the penalty for being a Christian over there is pretty severe. And so you've got that kind of situation. We don't have that. If we go out and knock door to door, we're going to get thrown in jail. Maybe a gruntled landlord for trespassing. But no, we're not. And when I've read a lot of information about the first century, and people were converted in the first century. They were converted by the behavior of Christians. Again, they took food to the sick. They cared for people who were down on their luck. And they just made a reputation for that, and that's what Christ was thinking about. You know, when you think about having the apostles standing on this big concrete platform, and you've got all these idols all around you, and really horrible idols. And Jesus says, upon this rock, and I think it's a dual meaning, but I think one of the meanings is right there. Upon this rock I will build my church. He's pointing to the ground. It says he's screaming this. And I can imagine this is a very touristy place. And I can imagine the crowds all around. And Jesus is yelling this. And I'm sure the disciple going, hey, Jesus, keep it down. It gets in trouble. And no, he says, no, you will take that. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. You will be able to take that mush up there and change it. And that's the part of the world that I want my disciples in. Go where you're needed. Go where the gospel is needed. And that's always an issue for me, in terms of how to and how to best be effective. Way back, every time we had a meeting, we all went out and knocked doors. And I can tell you, after knocking doors for several years, I don't think I ever even got in to be able to teach a lesson to anybody. Not a very effective form of spreading the gospel. But when I drew a line at, here's my relatives, and I started drawing all these lines. And you got aunts and uncles, cousins, second cousins, third cousins, all kinds of relatives. And I looked at them and thought, well, that's the best menu for me. It's just to start right there. So I did. And try to teach your relatives is pretty hard. It's harder than teaching out in the cold, for sure. All right. This is our last class, so I need to wrap it up. When Thomas comes back and he's actually there at the end of John, what does Jesus do? Do what? Yeah. Did Thomas ask that? Do what? Yeah. Yeah. Thomas didn't ask him. Did Jesus know what state of mind Thomas was in? Absolutely. And what he needed was evidence, because he's not believing that Jesus is raised from the dead. This cannot be Jesus. And he shows him his scars, and he believes. And Jesus scolds him, because he said there are a lot of people that are going to believe and that they'll never get to see. And you see and believe. So later on, Thomas is fully convicted. We read about his death and all the other deaths of the apostles in Justin Martyr's book. And that book was written a long time ago. In fact, the writer of a lot of the Jewish laws and language was alive then and took notes when Justin Martyr was talking. So anyway, we got a pretty good reading on each of the apostles and how they died. And if you want to look at that, Justin Martyr's book is still being printed, believe it or not. Now, John ends his book, and does he say, well, we've written everything that ever needs to be written? Does he say that? No. They've written everything necessary for salvation, haven't they? Everything necessary for salvation. We don't need anything else. But John says there are many, many other what? Yeah, it's an acts of Jesus, signs and acts. Many miracles we haven't told you about. We don't have a clue all that Jesus did because he was there 3 years. And you're looking at Matthew, Mark, and John covering that span with very little information. If you think about covering somebody's 3 years of a very intensive life in just a few paragraphs, that would be very, very difficult. But God wanted that told. He wanted that told because he wanted us to believe. He wanted us to believe. The Bible was written for us. It wasn't written to us, if you've ever heard that distinction, but it was written for us. Your brother really drills that a lot in his sermons, Andy. That it's not to us, so it's not like we're supposed to be able to understand every word or every word applies to us, but it is written for us. And if you remember that keeps them. A lot of people go to the Gospels and say, hey, here are a lot of discrepancies in the Gospels. I think last time I saw a list of them, it was 18. But they're not discrepancies. These people don't understand the Bible. They don't know what God's talking about. They don't know the plan. If you know that, then you're not going to put these verses in contradiction to each other, because they don't. Anyway, that was free, by the way. Who wrote the book of John? Seems that way. He says there are many other things which Jesus did, which if they should be written down every one, I suppose that even the world could not hold all of them. So I think he did write. Which seems like Paul did not write a lot of his, I don't know if he had a bad handwriting or eyes were weak or what, but he had somebody typically write his books. So, okay, so as he is ready to leave, Andy, tell us how he wraps it up. What does he leave the apostles with? He's leaving the earth. What are his last words? Especially, what's the mission he's got for his apostles?
He tells them that he's going to appear to them again. He's going to come. They're going to be used with power. So he tells them that they're going to eventually go out and preach the gospel.
Okay. He's got, yeah. Yep. How would you like somebody for you to say, okay, I'm going to refresh your memory so that you can remember everything? Because the apostles, you just think about the amount of information they were going to get right away. The Holy Spirit came upon the apostles on Acts 1 and 2, and they are able then to know what they are to teach, they have a remembrance of what they are to teach, and they went out and taught the world the gospel. How amazing is that they were able to do that in a short time that they did. Have they found and nominated another apostle yet? No, they haven't. Right now it's 11. So there's one more they're going to select. How do they select that one? They've got two guys that are qualified. What do they do to select them? Through rocks? Do what? What now? Lot. Cast lots. Like the soldiers did to cast lots for their token. Okay. Were those spiritually handled? You know, God knew who the best man would be. So I'm sure he had something to do with how everything came out that way. Anyway, Matthias is chosen. They're back to 12. It will be, that book of Acts will tell us how things got started, basically. Then the apostles aren't writing books until probably about 68, 69. And Paul has penned his, and they're out. Some of them are not out yet. John, from what I read, John's last book, 3rd John, didn't get out for a long, long time. And I'm not sure how they figured out it was original. But anyway, the books are all put together. Writings are all done. No, they're not. They do not have a New Testament right now. So what do they have to depend on? Okay. Do they have anything in writing? They had the letters, didn't he? By and large, as Paul went along, he wrote a lot of letters. He wrote 13 of them. And so some of the other, they wrote letters. And everybody passed around these letters. Everybody did. All right, well, my back is gone and I have to sit down, but it's almost time. Thank you for the class this time. Sorry, so much things were going on in my body during that time, but I couldn't help that. But I appreciate everybody's attention and good words.
Lord, to wait right down.